We have even more to discuss in regard to Clarence Thomas and his apparent corruption. There are two more big stories on him that I'll update you on. At least I haven't talked about them on the show yet. During this segment, we'll go over them, starting with this Washington Post article titled "Judicial Activist Directed Fees to Clarence Thomas's Wife, Urged No Mention of Ginny." Conservative judicial activist Leonard Leo arranged for the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas to be paid tens of thousands of dollars for consulting work just over a decade ago, specifying that her name be left off billing paperwork, according to documents reviewed by the Washington Post. In January 2012, Leo instructed the GOP pollster Kellyanne Conway to bill a nonprofit group he advises and use that money to pay Virginia Ginny Thomas, the documents show. The same year, the nonprofit, the Judicial Education Project, filed a brief to the Supreme Court in a landmark voting rights case. So that very organization then filed a brief to the Supreme Court, and the justice that's wife is getting paid by them is ruling on that case. My goodness. Leo, a key figure in a network of nonprofits that has worked to support the nominations of conservative judges, told Conway that he wanted her to give Ginny Thomas, quote, give Ginny Thomas another $25,000, the documents show. He emphasized that the paperwork should have no mention of Ginny, of course. Why is that? Conway's firm, the polling company, sent the Judicial Education Project a $25,000 bill that day. Per Leo's instructions, it listed the purpose as supplement for constitution polling and opinion consulting, the documents show. In all, according to the documents, the polling company paid Thomas's firm, Liberty Consulting, $80,000 between June 2011 and June 2012, and it expected to pay $20,000 more before the end of 2012. The documents reviewed by the Post do not indicate the precise nature of any work Thomas did for the Judicial Education Project or the polling company. So you're just being handed tens of thousands of dollars, but it's being described as an amount they're giving to Ginny Thomas for consulting work. What type of consulting is being done? And then the very organization paying her is having cases in front of the Supreme Court that her husband is ruling on. Yeah, no, that's not good. That's not okay. That's old-fashioned corruption right there. And here was Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse's response to this.
Second thing is that all the mischief with Leo and these phony front groups, all of that is potentially in violation of the tax code. Some of it is conceivably even fraud. There could be potentially criminal aspects to this, particularly if there was no work performed for that $25,000. And all of that can be properly investigated without getting into the internal operations of the court and Clarence Thomas.
So possible fraud, he says. Wow. And then for the next story about Clarence Thomas, let me quickly, to kind of set this up, summarize what we've learned so far about his relationship with Harlan Crow, and then we'll get into the new stuff. So Clarence Thomas has a friend named Harlan Crow. Harlan Crow is a GOP mega donor billionaire. Harlan Crow has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, as I've called it, wining and dining Clarence Thomas, but on lavish gifts and trips for Clarence Thomas that Clarence Thomas didn't disclose as he's supposed to. Then we also learned that Harlan Crow purchased the home of Thomas's family, did thousands of dollars of renovations, and then just lets Clarence Thomas's mother stay there rent-free. Nice stuff, but that also wasn't disclosed. Real estate transactions are supposed to be disclosed. And as we talked about, but to go over it again, the reason why disclosure and ideally just avoiding receiving these types of things at all is so important is because this would be the perfect way for wealthy individuals to swoop in and influence federal judges and justices, spend a bunch of money on them, give them a bunch of gifts, and then influence them to vote more right-wing or however you are politically on cases, or be more business-friendly if you're a billionaire like Harlan Crow, whatever it might be. We'll talk about this more after this. This is from CNN on the newest element of the Harlan Crow Clarence Thomas relationship.
New this morning, ProPublica has just released a new investigative report raising more questions about Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas's relationship with that Republican mega donor, Harlan Crow. ProPublica says the Texas billionaire actually paid for Justice Thomas's grandnephew to attend private boarding schools in Georgia and Virginia after they dug into unrelated court filings. Justice Thomas had legal custody of the boy, who is identified in the report as Mark Martin. Martin lived with Justice Thomas and his wife, and they were said to be raising him as a son. What's unclear this morning is how much the bill was, but ProPublica does say that Crow picked up the full tab, according to a school administrator, a former school administrator. It could have exceeded $150,000 based on these public records. ProPublica says Thomas did not disclose the payments from Harlan Crow, the payments for the tuition. He did once disclose a $5,000 contribution to the boy's education from another friend, but not these. Crow's office responded to this report with a statement saying Harlan Crow has long been passionate about the importance of quality education and giving back to those less fortunate, especially at-risk youth. It's disappointing that those with partisan political interests would try to turn helping at-risk youth with tuition assistance into something nefarious or political.
So you heard it there. The defense from Crow is, how dare you get mad at me over an act of kindness? Sir, that's not what's going on. No one's mad at you for paying for a kid's private school tuition. That's sweet. Great. They're mad that, number one, Thomas kept it a secret. And number two, this adds onto a pile of things you're doing for him specifically, not someone, for him specifically, that likely makes it impossible for him to rule impartially on certain subjects. Countless ethics law experts and former and current judges have come out and said they would never have dared to do what Clarence Thomas has. I say, as I have in the past, okay, you know what? Harlan Crow and Clarence Thomas, you say you're just buddies and this has nothing to do with Thomas being a Supreme Court justice. Okay, but if you were trying to influence a Supreme Court justice, let's just imagine together, how would you do it? If you just give them a briefcase full of hundreds of thousands of dollars of cash, I think even that would be likely a little bit too far for Republicans. That might lead to an impeachment. So instead, you'd probably do exactly what Crow is doing for Clarence Thomas. Lots of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars still. It's just not in a briefcase. It's for tuition. It's for trips. And how can you rule impartially after that has been done for you if a case comes up that impacts Harlan Crow, or just generally he's very ideologically driven, obviously, as a big GOP donor. And by the way, I have a hard time imagining that Harlan Crow actually believes this isn't in part to influence Clarence Thomas based on something that he has said. This is being reported on from The Guardian. Asked whether he ever considered their friendship as a ticket to quid pro quo, he replied, quote, "Just wait, before I read you that, you can see on the screen, but for our podcast listeners, I'm going to add suspense. What would be the response if you actually weren't doing this as a quid pro quo? It would be, no. Is this a quid pro quo? No, it's not. How dare you? I'm horrified. But instead he responds, quote, "Every single relationship, a baby's relationship to his mom, has some kind of reciprocity." Okay. Harlan, Clarence, this is stinking to the high heavens. The takeaway from all this, though, is the Supreme Court can no longer govern itself when it comes to ethical standards. Now, in this situation, even the small number of laws that do apply to them seem to have possibly been violated. So this could end up being an enforcement issue as well. But we also need new laws on the books. Every federal court is held to a much higher ethical standard than the Supreme Court. That's absurd. They should be subject to the same ethical code as, if not a more extensive one than, every other federal court. But for some reason, just because they seem to delight in taking the wrong stance on seemingly everything, Republicans in the House of Representatives are likely not going to go along with something of the sort, or implementing something of the sort.